Welcome to the Game of Attention podcast, the podcast led by industry leaders exploring creative in a technologically advancing world. Hear from experts across the CPG industry, navigating creative effectiveness across channels such as advertising, e-commerce, and in-store. Released twice monthly, this is the podcast you don't want to miss.
Hello there, and welcome to Dragonfly's Game of Attention podcast, episode 32, I believe. Today we're going to be talking about connected creativity and the future of creative data. Today's guests are Akshay Sardesai and Dr. Alistair Goode. Akshay is from Reckitt and is VP of Marketing, and Ali is our very own cognitive scientist here at Dragonfly. So, Akshay, do you want to give a quick introduction for yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Giles. I'm very happy to be here. I've been with Reckitt now for over 12 years, and prior to that, I've had experiences with Procter & Gamble and an Indian CPG company called Marico. So spent close to 2 decades now in marketing and really passionate about consumer behavior, consumer insights, creativity, and especially capability development in the space of creativity, I think is something that I'm really passionate about. So I think this topic on connected creativity is really close to my heart. And very, very happy to be here and part of this discussion.
Ali, would you want to give a little bit about your background and your role at Dragonfly?
Certainly, yes. I'm also very happy to be here, of course. My name is Dr. Ali Goode. I'm a cognitive scientist by trade. I started off as an academic cognitive scientist, did my PhD in advertising and non-conscious memory, and have spent the last 20 years working in advertising and media with the aim of trying to apply good cognitive science to try and help us understand some of those intangible things, particularly with an interest in kind of creativity advertising, because I think there's a lot of very interesting psychology that you can apply, which sometimes is and sometimes isn't. And I like to sort of work with some academics, and I have worked with academics recently on things like understanding attention better.
Let's dive straight in and have a bit of a conversation. The first question that I've got for you, and this is probably one that Akshay, you can kick off with, is around what the successful integration of creative media and data teams actually looks like in a practical sense, in terms of kind of how those different elements all come together. So I don't know if you've got a bit of a view around that.
No, for sure. I think it's a very interesting question. And I'm glad that we are asking this question to kick off the discussion, because even a few years ago, this would not be relevant to industry practices at all. And the reason I say that is because the traditional brand marketing model was always built on groups of specialists who are working across different stages of the creative process. And often some of these groups were internal to the company and some were external. So you had the brand teams, you had creative agencies, media teams, media agencies, insights and analytics. And there was the belief that each of these groups needs to be separate and specialized in their own way. And I think over the years, the industry kind of evolved a number of systems and processes to make these disparate groups really come together and work together collaboratively, right? And that's what the integration really looked like till about maybe a decade ago. I think things have changed dramatically today, because while this model has its strengths, it doesn't really have the agility and speed that you need to compete in today's market conditions. And that's why you're seeing companies take a very different approach now. And really the model seems to be all integrated end-to-end responsibility, end-to-end ownership of the creative process. You're seeing companies in-house a lot of capabilities that were traditionally outsourced. So creative capabilities, media capabilities, analytics, all of this is being integrated together. And I think that seems to be the model that we're all gearing towards. I mean, you see a lot of new companies, startups, etc., kind of practicing this from the get-go. And you're also seeing a lot of large companies taking, if not major steps, but at least baby steps towards moving in that direction. I guess this works very well from the point of view of driving a lot of efficiency and, making sure that the entire creative funnel is optimized, and iterative testing, for example, iterative development is really, really streamlined when you have this kind of a structure. The big bottleneck that I see is, on one hand, there are still legacy mindsets and organizational challenges which really prevent the whole scale adoption of this kind of a model, because it's not just about creating a team and reorganizing it. You have to structure the rest of the organization around it. You need talent management, you need new systems and processes, you need new decision-making frameworks, you need infrastructure a lot has to happen to enable this kind of an integrated team to work together. And that is what makes change very difficult. So I think disruptive change is very, very challenging. Incremental change also takes its own course of time. So I think that's the kind of transition that I see the industry in. The other challenge that I see here in achieving this vision is actually capability, because historically, the silos that were created between these different specialist teams have kind of led to people growing capabilities within their domain. So you have a lot of domain experts, but it's very hard to find somebody who can actually their knowledge spans across different functional areas. And the moment you start integrating teams like this into one system, you need people to have knowledge of each other's domains. You need people to have generalist capabilities and the ability to then bring together all of these things, right? And I think our traditional talent development systems, our skill development systems haven't evolved far enough to do that. So I see those as very big bottlenecks at this point in time to achieving this kind of vision. But change is happening. Slowly but surely, we're getting there for sure. Whether it's project specific pods, or you have certain business units which are being restructured with specific structures which are more future proof in that sense, you're seeing the change happen.
One observation from what Akshay said is that I think, as I spent a lot of time as a researcher of advertising, media, and the like, I think you do are expected to be this kind of font of all knowledge, when actually you really are kind of, trying to catch up in many ways with many different things. So that's one thing that's very well observed. In terms of the actual process of creation, I mean, I come at it very much from a psychological perspective. I think that I can certainly see where the bottlenecks that Akshay's talked about, because I've experienced them myself, where you've got creative teams who like to have ideas and like to be the spontaneous. And I think we do need this. But also there's that trying to create that with human insight. And I think to create that alongside human insight, and then the whole area that I've been looking at, which is the question of exactly how aware and how able are people to tell you what makes good creativity and what doesn't, or they can probably tell you what does, but maybe not why it is. And I think the why is always the big question, because that's the diagnostic as to understanding how to make something better, or make something improved, or or make it resonate better. I think that's the big challenge, is that we're limited by our own capabilities of being able to express why we think we like something.
Really interesting point, Ali, and it kind of brings me really nicely onto my second question here, and it flows quite nicely from that, in terms of and we can start with Ali for this one. But like, what do you see from, obviously we've talked about human capabilities and the ability to kind of predict the why and the how to do something differently. Ali, what role do you see infrastructure and tech playing within that? Because obviously we're coming into an age now where technology and AI and this kind of thing are really kind of coming to the fore very, very strongly. So a big challenge that a lot of people have with AI is implementing it in the right place and in the right way. So what do you see the kind of the tech role within that, and more broadly from an AI perspective?
Because AI is obviously my day-to-day life at the moment, I can probably rattle on a bit for that, because I'll try and keep it short. So I think the main distinction with AI that one has to be recognised is that artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence. It's not a human intelligence. Name dropping wildly as I go, a very good friend of mine called Professor Anil Seth wrote a book called Being You, which did very well on various things, and I recommend it thoroughly. But it's this whole debate. I went to a talk of his, and we sort of talked about the difference between what consciousness is and what intelligence is. And just because something's going to be intelligent, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have any kind of insight or understanding of the human condition or be like a human. And I think that's point number one. So we have to look at it in those terms, that AI is very good at learning rules. It's very good at learning systems, but it's not going to be very good at kind of connecting and understanding the human condition, which is what only really we can do, because we kind of a part of our evolutionary mental process is to actually be able to understand somebody else's perspective from their point of view. It's integral into how we actually evolved. So with that in mind, I think some of the things that we are looking at is, I joined after the world of attention was sort of kicked off, because I did a lot of work with attention in the media in the UK. But certainly there are definitely rules there as to what eyes look at, what draws the visual system, why the visual system discriminates from things and looks at one thing and not another. So certainly AI has a role there, as has been shown. Also, there are other rules as well. Some of them, there are certainly rules to memory. So we know that repetition, and we know that rhyme, and we know that rhythm, we know that simplicity of speech or language, all of those things contribute to the ability to make something more memorable. We know that there are certain emotional things that make that everybody responds to. Smiling faces, of course. Though the aesthetics of it, things like the golden ratio are universal, and all of these universal things that we sort of are pulling out of psychology to be able to then present those to AI. And there are also other things as well. One of my particular favourites is persuasion, because I think that's a very broad, generalistic term. But I did a meta-analysis of a whole bunch of adverts and found there are lots of references to psychological references you can start to pull out of those. And again, you can start to see rules. So I think we have to be careful not to sort of overburden AI with this whole idea of it's going to be a human mind that we can tap into and it'll be everything. We have to think carefully about where we can strategically apply good psychology, which is giving us good rules that the AI can learn. And then that can be done at scale and move that forward. So therefore, it provides the role of being a sort of a mediator, an arbitrator of what can and can't is going to work, but not necessarily is going to create the beautiful creative spark at the beginning that is going to connect with people perfectly.
Akshay, I saw you nodding along studiously there. Do you agree with that? And how does that represent itself in the Reckitt world?
No, I absolutely agree with what Ali was saying. I think he made some really, really important points there. And the way I like to look at it is the age-old saying that, marketing is an art and a science. And I think there are two distinct parts and there are distinct tools that are used for each of these. I think where AI seems to be playing a very, very crucial role is really in perfecting the science part of it. And I think it's a very, very crucial role. And on an everyday basis, that's the part that we do tend to use more often. So whether it is insight generation, content generation, optimization, testing, even if you have something like gut feel, you can actually now test your gut feel. And I think there is definitely that part that AI is really facilitating is in really perfecting the science. Even things like emotional intelligence, expressions. You have a lot of predictive modeling in these spaces now, something that Ali was also referencing, which I think is fascinating. And it really helps you make more effective decisions versus a few years ago where decisions used to be purely subjective based on gut feel of the observer, or the highest paid person in the room is the one who's taking really the call. Right, and you trust that their salary is in proportion to their judgment. And I think that piece is definitely something that I think AI and other MarTech tools are really enabling. But I do agree that the art part of marketing is, at this point in time at least, a human discipline, and you need that. Because if I look at this whole angle of marketing as an art, it's not just because marketing is a creative discipline or creativity is involved. It's because, like other forms of art expression, it has the ability to impact behavior. It has the ability to impact society, change behavioral codes, change cultural norms. Marketing has played a huge role in the last 100 odd years in shaping society the way it is today. And that is why it's an art. And I think those aspects of intuition, gut feel, human intelligence, thinking outside the box are where you still need human intervention. I think AI will augment that, but it's still the science and not the art.
Just to jump in there, I think one interesting tale from my career was I was a judge on the IPA Awards a few years ago now. And being a nerdy cognitive scientist, I'm fascinated by how to dissect things. I pull things apart. I started out life as an engineer and then found I enjoyed pulling brains apart far more than engines and cars and stuff. And I was really excited to be invited to be a judge on these the most prestigious awards for UK advertising. And I thought, great, I'm going to get hold of these papers. I'm going to see how the minds of the creative agencies work. And this is going to be fascinating. And literally the format for every paper was: brand came to us with a problem, creative magic happened, and it worked. And I could see into the fact, I could see how like you say, their gut feel. Their gut feel was right. Their gut feel was right on many, many occasions, and they'd done the right thing. But they didn't seem to quite have the insight to understand why what they were doing was the right thing to do. And I think that's the fascinating question. As a psychologist, I get hugely interested in digging in and sort of the real detail of all the psychology behind what they're doing, because they're doing the right stuff. But there's a whole bunch of really interesting things that you can start saying, well, actually, that's that bit and that's this bit, and start pulling things together. And, they normally get it right, but there are some ways in which you can actually pull it apart to go, that's quite interesting. And sort of, so yes, there's that creative spark, and I think you always need that. But there's also some psychology that people naturally use as well.
Very interesting. I've got a little bit of a question here that maybe playing devil's advocate slightly. So, in a world where we have different layers of AI and we're bringing data to the party, how do we guard against the data stifling the creativity and the kind of the elements that we've been talking about here in terms of gut feel and that kind of stuff? Because surely there's a danger if we go too far down the route, or we don't use things in the right way, that we end up stifling that creativity and everything just becomes uniform.
I think I'd play that back to you as the other way around, to say, is gut feel stifling, and gut feel creativity stifling actual output and actual end results? Because I think, I've worked on a lot of big campaigns in my time, and one particularly whose name I won't mention was an advert that was absolutely vilified for being terrible. And as the researchers, we found that the creative idea itself was fine, but somewhere along the line, somebody had a gut feel that thought they should repackage it in a different way. It went viral in the sense of being just one of the worst ads that had ever been seen. But somebody somewhere had that gut feel, because we did the research on it, and the research we did didn't bear any resemblance to the actual ad that came out at the other end. I think within an AI, there's enough flexibility for it to learn lots of different things and not just come down to one sort of generic solution. Is one thing. But on the other way around, I think, as much as we creative people generally do have the right idea, sometimes they do get it wrong. And I think that's against trying not to avoid those major sort of fault or the major negatives. I think the other things that AI is going to be very good at preventing.
I think it's a very interesting point that you made, Ali, and I completely agree with you. There is a role for gut feel and there is a role for data and science. And I think we need to look at it from the end-to-end creative process, and at what stage do each of these apply, especially in the upstream part of the process where it's really all about, a lot of it is about inspiration. You do need gut feel, you do need the human intuition to really start leading the way. You can't delegate that responsibility over to AI. I mean, you go to ChatGPT or Copilot and you put in a prompt right now asking them to come up with a creative, you will get ghastly creatives. It's creative, sure, it'll tick the box on a lot of algorithms as well, I'm sure, but it's not really effective.
I'd slightly challenge that by saying you could put it into ChatGPT and get several thousand creatives, and one of them will be good, but it won't know which one it is.
Correct. Exactly. So you don't want to do that, right? So you don't want to outsource creativity and gut feel to a tool, especially at the upstream part of the process. But then, when it comes to evaluation, like, I think it's a very good point that you brought up, Ali. I think, as I was saying earlier, that you traditionally always had the highest paid person in the room, and their gut feel was the one that drove all the decisions. There is definitely room for us to use a lot more of data and science out there to enable that person to take a better decision and not having to rely on gut feel alone. I think there is still a role for gut feel, and because data has its own limitations, but it's just about how do you use it and at what stage in the process.
Yeah, I said. I mean, one thing to add to that. I mean, I've spent my career working in what's now called behavioral economics, sort of two-process system, and what we're talking about, intuition, is system one in many ways.
Yes.
And I think what you do find, if you look into the psychology and science of system one, you can actually show why people who have these inspirational moments are having them and why they're right. And I think so. Creatives shouldn't be afraid of the science. It's not there to disprove them. It's actually there to show why they've got the ideas that they have. They just have it in a more sort of artsy, inspirational way than being a boring scientist like me and analyzing everything to death. So
no, absolutely. And I think the beauty of the tools that we have today is that you don't have to wait till the end of the process to find out whether your gut feel was right or wrong. You can do it early on. You don't, I mean, even I would say 5 or 6 years ago, it was a long creative development process. And until you actually have the finished creative and then you do like a traditional link test on it, you would never find out. And sometimes it was just too late. You've invested too much money and time in it, so you might as well air it, even if your link test tells you that it's a flop. That's how practically things work.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things because link tests, no matter what I think it was Millward Brown, I can't remember who it is now, would say this always bumps into the point if you show somebody a piece of creativity, no matter if they're self-reporting and they're telling you what they could bring to their conscious mind about it. So they're having to consciously mentally reconstruct that experience and then report it to you and report why they like it. We're just not very good at doing that. And I think, link test and things like that are very good at burying their negatives. They bury their dead very well, because if it doesn't work, it never gets made, so you never know. So I think link tests are biased towards where there's a clear message, where there's a clear understanding, where people can retain information and say, yes, I like that proposition, rather than some of the creative stuff or more creative stuff, which doesn't necessarily works in a sort of more subtle way. I know Les Bennett and Peter Field have done quite a bit of work on this, but in the UK. So it's anyway. That's another debate. Anyway,
Really, really, really interesting, guys. And I'm just conscious on time, but I've got one question for you that's going to kind of take this to the next stage. So as we've been discussing, we live in a world now where there's a real strong relationship between the creativity, the gut feel, the art, if you like, and a whole new raft of tools and ways of working that enable us to be able to really bring data to that, to validate that, and to do it quickly and to do it efficiently. So my $1 million question is, what does the relationship between the creative and the data side of things look like in practical terms to enable us to make the most out of both elements?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what we were talking about earlier. Is the way I see it is it's at different stages of the creative process. You have roles for gut feel and intuition, and you have a role for science. Increasingly, we are seeing organizations and even creative agencies building up a lot of AI capabilities, and not just in the optimization or the scaling of assets part of it, because that's really where it all started. But now increasingly you have synthetic research groups, you have insight generation, you have content generation, quick idea screeners, etc., being done very much at the upstream part of the process itself. So I think the way I see this evolving, I mean, AI tools are going to make their way into every single step of the creative process. And it's a question of how do you balance the use of that gut feel and don't let the AI tool take it over. You don't want to rely too much on it. What comes first is what is most important. You have a gut feel, you have a big idea, use the tool to verify it, to validate it very quickly. You don't have to wait 6 months and $1 million later to find out that your gut feel didn't work. You could do it instantly, right then and there. AI can give you 100 ideas, but you could also use tools to find a way to filter them and find out where you will get the most bang for the buck. And you can do this very, very early on in the process. So the way I see it is you can definitely drive a lot more efficiency. You can fail early and avoid a lot of mistakes later on in the process.
I echo that completely, because I think there's, going back a few years now, but certainly when I started, it was you almost got to the point at which, when you were called in to do the sort of final qualitative check that everything was fine with a piece of with an ad idea or a creative idea, it was almost as if you weren't allowed to let it fail, and you had to find the positive in it, because so much had been it's called misplaced consistency. It's a psychological effect that if a lot of people have put their heart and soul into something, and actually you've done it. I mean, I did something for Virgin Trains in about 15-20 years ago, and they made a really, really beautiful creative about old film characters on the new trains, and it worked really well. But you did it in the focus group, and people just talked about how bad Virgin Trains were at that time, because they weren't very good at the time. But we used a kind of implicit testing technique that proved actually that we had shifted attitude, or the ad had shifted attitudes. So I think when it comes to sort of applying the technology now, certainly human understanding is human understanding, and we have to have that. But certainly where there are rules, the AI can really, really help to understand how to develop, implement, and express those ideas in the most effective way.
Really, really interesting, guys. I think I concur with both of you in terms of getting AI used in the right place, in the right way, not to stifle creativity, but to expedite the process and to navigate the way through the huge volumes of creatives that organizations are producing now. So really, really interesting. I think we're about out of time now, so I'm going to have to say goodbye. This is a topic that is quite close to my heart, and I could talk for a lot longer. So maybe we'll have a follow-up podcast at some point. But at this point, thank you both so much for your time. Really, really interesting points made there, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
That's a wrap for this episode. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Your support helps us keep bringing you fresh insights and expert advice. Want more content like this? Head over to dragonflyai.co and check out our resources page. Thanks for listening to Game of Attention. See you next time.